with NBC White House correspondent and Weekend Today co-host Peter Alexander, NBC's Garrett Haake on Capitol Hill, Chuck Rosenberg, a former senior FBI official and former U.S. attorney, now host of The Oath podcast, and NBC presidential historian Michael Beschloss. Welcome all. Peter, first to you. This call is so extraordinary. What is the latest reaction to it, both from White House staff, other officials in Georgia, and the people on the other end of that call from Georgia?
Well, White House officials in particular have been notably silent on this, again, referring to the president's comments and his tweets over the day where he's still fuming. It's clear that Georgia is on his mind. Recognize even if in some alternate universe he could flip the 16 electoral votes there, that wouldn't do enough to win him the election. But the president in this call, more than an hour of it that we've listened to in its entirety, is berating, he's badgering, he's even begging Georgia's Republican Secretary of State to find him that 11,780 votes, as he describes it. Not that he's looking for a free and fair election here, but just that he wants to have one more vote than needed to have a vote where he is the winner. It's the bottom line for the president. And again, in this call, he is spewing false claims, conspiracy theories. He's not arguing the facts, and he's fact-checked throughout it by not just the Secretary of State, but by his general counsel, the lawyer for the Secretary of State's office, Ryan Germany, as you played there as well. These are debunked conspiracy theories, things that the president himself acknowledged he heard not on social media, but from Trump media. Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, did speak out in an interview today saying, in fact, he's been fighting this sort of perpetual game of whack-a-mole to try to knock out all these theories the president's been touting. And here's part of what else he said. Take a listen.
We've debunked every one of those theories that have been out there, but the President Trump continues to believe them.
Did you feel the pressure when he said find the votes?
No, we have to follow the process, follow the law. He did most of the talking, we did most of the listening, but I did want to make my points. The data that he has is just plain wrong.
You hear from Raffensperger there that he thought it was inappropriate, frankly, to speak to the president. This is not something he was comfortable with doing. It's why he wanted legal counsel on during the course of the call. And NBC News has now confirmed from a Georgia Republican familiar with this call that there had been 18 previous attempts by the White House to put President Trump in touch with Raffensperger since the election 2 months ago. Andrea?
And Chuck Rosenberg, that's just incredible. 18 attempts to put the president in touch with them. I want to talk about any potential criminal liability, state or federal. Let's listen to another section from that call.
The ballots are corrupt, and you're going to find that they are, and which is totally illegal. It's more illegal for you than it is for them, because you know what they did and you're not reporting it. That's a criminal offense. And you can't let that happen. That's a big risk to you and to Ryan, your lawyer. That's a big risk.
And how threatening is that, Chuck? I know that you don't think that there's a federal issue here, but what about state issues? Both criminal, federal, I mean rather state, in terms of felonies or in terms of misdemeanors?
Yeah, well, first, Andrea, let me tell you, what the president did is appalling, it's sickening, it's disgusting. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a federal crime. And here's why I say that. The federal statute, and I read both the federal code and the state code, the federal statute requires that you show that the president's conduct was knowingly false. So if the president is deluded, or maybe most charitably just mistaken, but more likely deluded, you're going to have a hard time showing that it was knowingly false. That said, I don't know that you don't have a federal crime. You certainly have evidence of a federal crime. The phone call is evidence. You could predicate an investigation on it. You could talk to other people with whom the president spoke. You could talk to other people on the phone call. Now that we know he tried this 18 times, there's a lot of people you might want to talk to. The state code, the Georgia state code, I think, seems to me to be more on point because the president begged, essentially, the Georgia Secretary of State to find him more votes. And if you read the Georgia state code, that seems to be a more more clearly to me a criminal violation. So, interestingly, I think you have evidence of a federal crime. I think you have stronger evidence of a state crime. And in either case, you absolutely have a basis to go look further and ask more questions.
And of course, there's the well-known established precedent from the Justice Department that there's no crime that you could take against the president or prosecute against the president right now while he's in office, but there are only 16 days left. And there's always the state cases that he could not pardon himself from, but that's going down the road. Garrett, I want to talk about the divide in the Senate. You've got an extraordinary rebellion against Mitch McConnell, who pleaded with his conference a week and a half ago not to do exactly this. And now you've got Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, others with 2024 ambitions, perhaps, going against McConnell's expressed wishes. Tom Cotton, surprisingly, an ambitious Arkansas Republican, not joining them. This is quite an amazing divide among the Republicans. And then the president threatening Thune and others with being primaried for not going along.
Yeah, it really is extraordinary. I mean, this is a fissure in the Republican Party here about how to handle the end of the Trump era. And that's really what it comes down to. When you look at that list of senators who are going to object in some form or fashion to the electoral vote count, you see a mix of people who might have aspirations of running for the office of president themselves, Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley. You see the 4 incoming Senate Republicans who feel perhaps they owe their election to the president, along with Steve, who just won a tough re-election in Montana. Then you see a couple of people who are Trump loyalists who are up or perhaps up for re-election themselves in 2022, trying to make sure that Trump stays with them. Look, Mitch McConnell spends an enormous amount of time and energy to make sure lists like that and segments like this don't happen. So much of his focus is keeping the Republican conference unified, keeping them focused on the things they all agree on. This is such a good example now of something that they do not, with McConnell and a number of his top lieutenants and perhaps a dozen or more Senate Republicans now having to come out with the simple statement that they will do their, constitutionally authorized job here, essentially, and count the electoral votes and nothing more. This split here has also led to the emergence of the president now sort of publicly tweeting about what amounts to his enemies list, which happens from time to time to include lots of these folks. He responded to Tom Cotton with a tweet talking about how can you certify the validity of an election that is invalid. Tom Cotton, he says Republicans will remember. It's hard not to see that as some kind of a threat, and refers to the surrender caucus within his own Republican Party for not fighting hard enough. This is a debacle for Senate Republicans.
And he's doing this all within 24 hours of this very important Georgia vote, the runoff, which will decide who controls the Senate. Michael Bench, let's talk about the president, the phone recordings. Certainly there's, in history, the Nixon unwinding in the final days, and a number of officials taking actions like the defense secretary, James Schlesinger, to make sure that the president couldn't do anything untoward. Now you've got 10 former defense secretaries in both parties coming out in the op-ed in the Washington Post today, led by Dick Cheney, apparently, to do this, saying that the military should not get involved. How concerned should we be about the president and what's going forward?
I think we should be very concerned, Andrea, because why would those former defense secretaries come out with a statement like that if they were not worried that Trump might try to abuse the military, either to get us involved in an unnecessary war or to call in the 101st Airborne to try to help him stay in office and stay in the White House? What we heard on that tape is an impeachable offense. How many presidents were impeached or almost impeached for abuse of power? This is a president, we heard it on that tape for an hour, abusing his power by threatening the Secretary of State of Georgia as a mobster would. The acting, Donald Trump's acting is not quite as good as Marlon Brando's in The Godfather, but the dialogue sounds awfully similar. You almost think he's going to threaten him with a horse's head in his bed next if he does not recalculate the vote in Georgia. That is not this is America. That's not what presidents are supposed to do. And so we've now got a situation where, if we allow this to happen and there's no sanction, presidents in the future might feel licensed to abuse their power in the same way. One last question, Andrea. He made this call to the Georgia Secretary of State. There are other states that Donald Trump has been charging falsely where the vote was not calculated properly. I'd like to know what other secretaries of state and what other state officials he has secretly called, abusing them and threatening them in the same way he did in this call.
And there may not have been a horse's head, but there was a pig's head apparently outside of Nancy Pelosi's house.
I'll make no comment.
Unprecedented vandalizing of her home and of Mitch McConnell's home over the $2,000 checks. We don't know anything more about whether it was related or unrelated, but it's just the conspiracy theories are becoming dangerous, and that is my bottom line. It is really something where we all have to call people out for this. Thank you so much, Peter Alexander, Garrett Haake, Chuck Rosenberg, and Michael Beschloss for getting us started today. And